If you guys would like to buy coins, you can go to MMOXP.com. There will be a link in the description. They are the cheapest and safest option. You can use my code JFC at checkout for a 5% discount. We have just reached January, which means it is Team of the Year time. And we got this Team of the Year voting today that was a bit controversial. There were some players in it that people didn't think should be in it, players that were left out that should be in it apparently. That's not what I want to get into today. We'll talk about that maybe in our daily video coming up later, but January means Team of the Year time, right? And I want to kind of make the case for like this Team of the Year is super important because last year's was a disaster and it honestly really affected the rest of the year. And I want to talk about why I think that this year, more than even last year, it could go worse than last year or it could go significantly better, which thanks Captain Obvious. But I want to make the case that this year's Team of the Year to EA super important. And if you're watching the second channel, you're a real loyal JFC fan, so thank you for that. And if you guys don't know what I do here, I literally just, on the second channel, if I have something on my mind, I just talk about it. That's the whole point of the channel. So I want to compare the Steam charts between FC 25, FC 24, and FIFA 23 and kind of explain the differences there. And I know that, by the way, Steam charts are not the best way to calculate like exact player counts. I mean, it's honestly a terrible way to count exact players. It's just a good way to see trends, right? Because trends on Steam will be similar to trends on console, trends on all platforms, right? The exact numbers are something that you don't need to bother looking at, but it's the trends that are important here because these percentages we look at will be pretty close to percentages that you see on all platforms, which is some slight variations, obviously, but that's the more important thing to look at in this video, and obviously you guys probably know that, but just want to preface that before we get into everything. But okay, so last year obviously was the Team of the Year Messi incident. A few months back in a community post, I highlighted how bad FC 24 Team of the Year was for EA, and taking a look at these team charts from last year, right? You've got the peak player count in January at 107,000, right? Peak Team of the Year time, peak interest for the game basically is almost always in January. You look at FIFA 23's Steam charts, same thing, 110,000 in January there, which was the peak for the whole year. So obviously January, very important for them, right? But in that community post, I highlighted how bad February was after Team of the Year last year. 107,000 to 67,000 peak player count. FIFA 23, not nearly as drastic, 110,000 to 93,000. So yeah, a minus 16,000 peak player count. FC 24 was a minus 39,000 player count with less peak by only 3,000, but still less peak, right? So obviously something happened there. And you might be asking, why am I looking at peak and not average? Well, EA, when they're talking to their shareholders, are going to always go by peak numbers. That's what's more important to them because that is the more potential they can sell to their shareholders, right? Because say, hey, at one point we had 107,000, right? That's how many we are hoping to keep. The average player count to them is not quite as important, still important, but not as important. So FC 24 chart, obviously you can say that there will always be a Team of the Year drop off. That's for sure the case, right? Definitely is going to be, but seeing that the peak player count is, I mean, how much less? You're looking at 25,000 less players from February 2023 to February 2024. That is a pretty insane drop off, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Team of the Year pack weight was terrible and it is just beyond horrendous. You've got the Team of the Year Messi situation. The fairness aspect of the game was entirely chalked at that point. So obviously whatever happened at the end of January into February 2024, not so great, right? I think that's pretty obvious to say that. And now looking at FC 25, the peak player count December of 2023 was 76,000. This year it was 86,000, right? So 10,000 more, which EA would look at and say, okay, that's good. Of course, comparing this number here to FIFA 23 is still less, 105,000. Now December's player count here has a gigantic increase. The reason for this though is there was a free weekend. I think during Christmas weekend, I want to say it was free. So huge numbers here, and that's basically because of that. So keep that in mind for this December date. So just comparing from last year, which is this number, which was 76,000, to this year, which was 86,000, you could say in general there might be a little bit more increase in interest from the casuals compared to last year, you might say, because the average is still right about the same, but the peak player count is higher. So that's kind of the rundown of what things have looked like so far. But Team of the Year talking about, right? Here's where I think EA got really lucky last year, because looking at the peak player counts, they actually kind of went back up as the year went on, right? You went up back up towards the lower 80s, right? 82,000 in May and July there. In July being 82,000, 110,000 is pretty impressive, actually. FIFA 23, you're looking at July 68,000 on a game that was more popular. But obviously, guess what was going on last year? Well, the Euros were going on last year. And guess what also helps? England were extremely far in the Euros to the point where they were in the final. The most popular country playing the game was still in a very competitive football tournament all the way until July. So I personally think that this player count could have looked so much worse. It could have been, I mean, post the beginning of Team of the Season, I don't even think Team of the Season would have helped that much. I mean, see April 72,901. May was 82,000, which was Team of the Season, but like a month before the Euros. I think EA got so lucky last year with the fact that there was just interest in real life football. The only real life football game to mainly play really is this one, so people came back, right? I think this year, they just can't get away with something like that again. If Team of the Year sucks, you are going to see that player count drop, and it's not going to rebound the same way that it did last year. This summer is going to be whatever EA release, and that's it. And you could argue it's not just Team of the Year. It's kind of all content around this time, right? It keeps you on until Team of the Season, or it doesn't. That maybe is a better way to say it. I think Team of the Year is most of that, but you maybe could say like it's kind of all content around this time, and I could get behind that. But this sort of average and peak player count sort of gets me into the next point here, which is the direction EA has gone with, you know, FC, right? It appears that they are catering to Wales and Wales only. It feels like that's sort of their strategy now. It's sort of like we don't really care about growing our game. It's more like the players we have on it, we need to get them all to spend more money rather than grow the game and have more people spend more money, if that makes sense. Look at the all-time peaks from all three games here. You've got FIFA 23, 110,000. FC 24, 107,000. FC 25, 110,000. Now, we're not Team of the Year yet. You could say this maybe goes to like 120. So maybe you could say it, I guess, technically could be growing in that way, right? But it's all about the same. FIFA 22, you'll never guess, 108,000. It's really all shockingly within the same number range. I mean, they're all within about 5,000. And obviously, Steam charts are not the most perfect. It's just the only information that we have right now. But the reason that this has more credence to me is that what's the business strategy EA have been doing for the last couple of years? It's getting everybody, the average player, to need to spend money, basically. There's no more, let's grow FC to then have more players spend. It's that we don't really give a shit if we grow. It's actually, let's get every single person to need to spend money that are playing this game. And these charts really do convey that same sort of like sentiment, that it does make sense that EA would want to do that because they're not growing. They're kind of staying the same, yet they need to make more and more money each year. And I think that the problem is that that's not sustainable. You're not going to make more and more money each year if you're not growing your player count. I probably just voice cracked, but that's where my next thing comes in. It's like, what's EA's plan from here? Are they just going to keep going down the path of like appease everything to Wales because we need to make more money, but we're not growing? So what do? I mean, how it's probably harder to grow player count than it is to just make some more manipulative microtransactions. It's probably easier to do that than it is to like, hey, we got to grow our player base. How do we do that? It's probably a lot easier to be like, hey, let's release a crazy store pack and let's make the pack animation more endorphin rushing, gambling inducing, right? It's probably a lot easier to do that than it is the contrary, which we have to kind of grow the whole game and make the whole game better to grow it all. And these are kind of all sentiments we've been thinking ourselves on our daily videos, on comment sections I see all the time, on other people's places, on my videos. We can kind of tell this stuff. And the people who play this game a lot, like you and I probably do, some of you might be casuals out there, but I think a lot of us are people that play the game a lot and are passionate about it. We can see what EA are doing. And I think a lot of the times we think that no, EA have the information. They know more than us. They know what they're doing, which to a certain extent I think can be true. But we know a lot about the game. We play this game on a daily basis. We play this game more than many of the devs do. We play this game more than many of the people working on this game, whether it be content or gameplay, actually do, which is probably normal for most games, but you get my point. It's that we know a lot, okay? When we see things happening, we need to like trust ourselves and say, okay, this looks this way. It probably is this way. Is kind of my point here, right? Because we see things like, hey, EA are catering this game now to the Wales more than ever. But you'll see some people say like, no, you know, the casuals are just not on YouTube. They don't post on social media. They're super happy with how things are going right now. That's not what EA are actually doing. They care about the casuals more than ever. Well, not really this year. They didn't really this year for a lot of the time. They didn't care about the casuals for the first 2 months. They went back on all their changes because they realized, oh shit, our average player player count, 63,000 in September to 39,000 just 2 months later. That's pretty crazy considering the loss here was the biggest loss. If you look at October to November that we had, it was -3% to -19% player count. Last year, looking at -2%, -14%, right? So that's not great either, but they were at least more this year, more of a drop off than last year. I'm not surprised when you fuck over the casuals as bad as they did, but that was their business plan coming into this year. It looks like their business plan was like, hey, we don't really care about growing the game. We want to grow each individual player's spending budget, basically. Oops, that didn't really work. We got to go back on it. So basically the point of this whole video, I think these charts and also EA's actions point towards a story of what they want to do. And I think sometimes as a community, we second guess ourselves and it's like, okay, the casuals must be loving this right now. The casuals must be spending a ton of money. We don't know the back end numbers, which is true. The back end analytics and data, we don't know that. So we kind of assume EA know what they're doing when it comes to this stuff. But these peak player counts sort of create a story for me that make a lot of sense where it's like, hey, the game isn't growing very much. So let's not worry about that. Let's figure out how to make money in other ways because we got to make more money than last year. It's how this shit works. We can't be stagnant. We can't make just a little bit less. We need to make more. It needs to be more. So what do? We now have 25 store packs in there because they just have to make more this year. And please don't let them. Please don't spend microtransactions. I'm begging you. But I don't know. That's basically where it comes in. The whole team of the year talk is that they won't get that bounce next year. If team of the year comes out, it's not very good. They lose more players than they did last year because they don't get that bounce back again. Their business plan is going to go from, yeah, we got to double down on this sort of like create the whale hypothesis, create the whale strategy next year. And we don't really care as much about the casuals. We care, but not as much as we used to. I think team of the year could be a big catalyst for all of this stuff coming to fruition. Now, obviously, it's more complex than that, more nuanced than that, but team of the year to me is like a start, right? That's why I think that this team of the year is extremely important. And just let me know what you guys think about that. If that theory makes absolutely no fucking sense, then just let me know in the comments. Tell me I'm a dumbass. Or if you think this makes sense, that's probably what could happen, but let me know too. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. I love you all. Peace.